Hello, once again, Mark Fletcher here. I recently purchased a Carenado Cessna 208B that was on sale for $17.99, and I haven't bought a Carenado airplane since probably Flight Simulator 10 days. Just never been terribly impressed with them other than their looks. They are definitely beautiful aircraft. But because the 208 fits in so nicely with FS Economy, I thought, well, $18, I'll give it a shot. Plus, I like the old school instruments, the Garmin 430, and all the Bendix King stuff. And I had never seriously flown a turboprop before. It's been fun studying the Pratt & Whitney PT6A engine. Quite a different beast from the piston engine in the Cirrus and Aero 3. I have to say, this airplane flies pretty good. I had forgotten all the torture I put myself through in setting up a new aircraft, as it's been a while since I bought one. I believe one of the most important and educational setups is the building of a useful checklist. Through this process, you learn the aircraft's V-speeds, takeoff power and prop settings, landing configurations, not to mention the location and functions of all the instrument switches. I like to download the checklists other people have written, and after studying them, I usually do my own from scratch as I fly, because that helps me learn the aircraft and what accommodates my style. So I thought you might enjoy seeing the process I go through in creating a checklist for a new aircraft. Just like most everything else, you've got to start out with a good set of tools. And for creating checklists, there is no better than Xchecklist. You can find a link to this in the description. And what's so great about Xchecklist is that it's interactive, not static. What that means is, when you flip a switch, for example, Xchecklist can sense that and mark that item as checked without any further interaction from you. This allows you to pay attention to the task at hand rather than the brief distraction of clicking the checkbox. It might not sound like a big deal, but you quickly realize the benefit. Xchecklist features include the ability to read all X-plane DataRefs and determine if the DataRef equals some value, is less than or greater than a value, is in the range of two values. You can also set the color of your text. So if you want something to stand out, you might choose red or yellow and maybe have the rest of your text green. You have lots of flexibility. Another nice feature is sort of a go-to command. Using this command allows you to go to a particular checklist rather than just dropping down to the next one in the file. One of the best features of Xchecklist is that it's very popular. You can find lots of Xchecklists that other people have written and are available at xplane.org. The next must-have tool is the DataRefEditor plugin. This plugin allows you to monitor the state of any DataRef in Xplane. For example, if you flip the taxi light switch, you can watch the real-time change of the taxi light on DataRef. Since Xchecklist does its magic based on DataRef values, this directly translates into Xchecklist. Also, if you want to write or modify plugins written in Python or fly with Lua, the DataRefEditor will be indispensable for those projects as well. Another important tool is finding a good text editor that has good search capability. You're going to be searching through files like log.txt and dataref.txt, which are very large, and finding specific strings of text in there can be challenging. I wish I could be more help here, but I'm not about to recommend the editor that I use. I'm very much of a dying breed of Unix programmers that learned text editing in the mid-70s. Before we get started building a checklist, I think it's important to establish some goals. Of course, checklists are nothing new to any pilot, and the need for them is fairly obvious. In the real world, the aircraft manufacturer provides checklists, usually in a spiral-bound book, and the pilot simply reads through the items and performs various functions. Sim pilots typically follow suit. Some even obtain the actual spiral-bound book and work through the checklist exactly as they would in real life. Nothing wrong with any of that. Xchecklist, however, changes things. I've been at this a long time, and I have to confess that I almost never use the checklist that I've built in the past. There's a number of reasons for this. Most of it has to do with familiarity and the tediousness of clicking a checkbox or searching through to find the right checklist. Bottom line, pretty much just laziness. So, when I started to write the checklist for the 208, I was determined to try and build in this laziness factor, and I believed Xchecklist gave me a chance to accomplish that goal. After a bit of contemplation, here are the goals that I came up with, and this continues to be an ongoing process. A very important goal was to build something that would be a good training aid for real-life flight. It reminded me of an ad that I used to see on television about this golf trainer where a big round loop thing and it trained you to have a proper swing. Now, of course, it's outrageous to think that you would drag this thing out on the golf course and actually use it, but certainly if you, in your backyard, use this thing consistently, that when you actually did get on the golf course, your swing would match this thing that you'd been doing. So I thought if I could get Xchecklist to do something similar, that's a good thing. A second goal was to use the checklist to learn the aircraft and include key information from the pilot handbook. My thinking was to create the first page of the checklist to include enough information so that when I was too lazy to actually use the checklist, maybe I could be motivated enough to at least open this splash page. Finally, accommodate my laziness. Don't overdo it, just the important stuff. I wanted to build a checklist that I would still want to use even after 100 flights. Okay, with all that in mind now, let's begin designing a checklist for the 208. I don't want to be preachy here because I think checklists are very personal and you need to build one that you're going to use and do it the way you want it done. So I want to emphasize that I'm simply showing you the way I'm doing it in hopes to kind of inspire you to go about this your own way. Now, an Xchecklist file is just simply a text file called clist.txt, and it lives in the top level of your aircraft's directory. So we'll bring this stubbed file up in our editor, and you can see this first section here that I've called colors table. That's basically a table of all the various colors that you can use. Now, I stole this from a guy named Goofy that does great checklists, and you can tell that I stole it because I wouldn't have misspelled the word color. And the rest of the file is made up of stubbed out checklists. This first one is my splash page, and I put the name of the aircraft that I'm building a checklist for. Then I have a pre-flight checklist. And notice that I have continue commands on each one of these that go to the next section. Run up, take off, climb. Then I have cruise, descend, before landing, landing, after landing, and shutdown. Now let's talk about the Xchecklist commands. There are a number of those, and you can check all of those out in the reference manual. I only use 4. The first one is SW define color, and we saw that in the colors table, and that allows you to assign the name of some color to color values. There's 3 values in there. I thought those were RGB values, but they're not. I'm not really sure what they are. I just use Goofy's table and go with it. Then there's SW checklist, and that assigns a name to a checklist and then allows you to provide a title to your checklist. Then there's SW item void under bar C, and that just allows you to put comments in. It's just really a comment thing. The underbar C allows you to put color tags in your string. And the most important one of all is SW item underbar C. And this is how you can display a checklist item and have it either be static or act upon a DataRef or even a set of DataRefs. And this can get really complicated or be really simple. Well, we need some examples. I highly recommend that you edit your checklist while you're inside of X-Plane and even flying your airplane. So let's do that. As you can see, we already have SW checklist in here, and we've got pre-flight, starting engine, and so forth. And here's the pre-flight, how that looks. This uppercase version is the name of the checklist, and then the lower upper lower part where it says pre-flight is whatever comment you want to have there. This shows up in the actual checklist. I'm just going to use this first section that I call splash page just to put some examples in here so you see how this works. In here you see SW item void underbar C, and then there's a backslash cyan backslash and then some stuff, and it says next pre-flight. This shows you how to put colors in your text. You give the color name and then you put backslashes in front and after that name, and then that turns on that color. And then if you want to switch to another color, then you put another color with backslashes and it will change to that. Here's an example. I'm just doing a silly little example here of changing colors from red to blue. We'll look at what this actually does here in a few minutes. Now for the tricky one, this SW item. We'll start out with a real simple form of this command. Here I'll just put in prop clear with nothing else. And if I leave off the vertical bar, then it will just use the word check. Okay, well, let's see how this works. I've saved the file. I'll go to the plugins menu and pull down Xchecklist and then reload, and this will reload my checklist file. Now I'll bring up my checklist and we'll compare that against the text that I entered. And this first line you see here in cyan corresponds to my SW item void cyan next pre-flight line. And then the other line that I have that shows the various colors, this is red, this is blue. You see how that works out. And notice I made the age-old mistake of forgetting to put spaces in there, so it jammed it all together. And then finally my SW item command for my prop clear, you see, since I didn't put a vertical bar or anything, it put the word check. You could really build your entire checklist using only this simple version of SW item, but the real power comes with the more complex forms. Let's look at those now. In this first example that we had done, we had left off the vertical bar, which means that it uses the default, which is check. And let's say we didn't want to use check, but we wanted to put our own word in there. So let's make a copy of this line. And we'll change this to prop area. And we'll do a vertical bar. And now in dark green, we want to use the word clear. And we'll save that. So we've saved our file. So now the difference between these two lines is this one uses check because that's the default. But here you're overriding the default and you're saying instead of using check, let's in dark green say the word clear. So let's see how this works. I'll reload my checklist. Now I brought it up here and you can see, let me get my text back up here. You can see this first line says check. That's this line right here. The second line I use the word clear. Now watch what happens when I click this prop area item, this second one. Because I have all those stubbed out empty checklists in the file with all those continues, Xchecklist is working its way through looking for another item, and it doesn't find one, so it goes all the way through the entire list. Now comes the real meat. Let's do a checklist item for taxi light on. And rather than having a static item like we just did, let's use a DataRef to actually check to see if the taxi light is on or not. Now there are several ways to find DataRefs. One way is to read through checklists that other people have written and steal them. Another way is to search through the datarefs.txt file in the Resources Plugins directory of Xplane, but you may not be able to find the DataRef you're looking for because only DataRefs that come with the stock aircraft are in this file. The surefire way is to use the DataRefEditor because it sees all DataRefs, including any custom ones this aircraft might use. So let's bring up the DataRefEditor. We go to Plugins, down to DataRefEditor, and then Show DataRefs. And then I'll resize it to fit in an area here that's easier to see. And since the word taxi is pretty unique, let's see if we can't get lucky and just type taxi in and see what we get. Oh great, it's that top line. And as I flip the taxi light on and off here, you see that value toggles between 0 and 1. So now we'll bring our text editor back up again, and I'll make a copy of this prop area line and change those two words to taxi light. Change clear to on, and then to have it read a DataRef we put a colon and then we reference the DataRef. Then to tell it what state we want it to react to, we put another colon, and we'll use 1 because we want it to respond to taxi light on equal to 1. Now to prevent Xchecklist from charging past this line, let's move that prop clear line to the bottom so that it'll stop there. Now we'll make sure to save our file and then reload Xchecklist. You see the little plus sign to the left of the checkbox for the taxi light item. That means Xchecklist will automatically check that item as soon as the associated DataRef condition is met. At this point now, Xchecklist is waiting for you to either check the box yourself or satisfy the condition, which we'll do by turning on the taxi light. Pretty cool, huh? The last form of SW item I want to show you is useful for controls that don't have discrete values, like the taxi light that we just got through looking at, which is either on or off. But what about controls like your prop that can be anywhere between certain values, or maybe your flaps, which can be anywhere between being down completely or up completely? Let's take a closer look at the flaps control. The 208 actually has 3 positions, 10%, 20%, and 30% flaps. So let's say you want a checklist item for landing flaps, where you might want either 20% flaps or 30% flaps to satisfy this landing flaps condition. So the first thing we need to determine is what DataRef is associated with the flaps and what the values are for each of the positions. So let's just type in flap here, see what we get. And I'm going to move the flap up and down here and watch for something that changes. And we can see there's more commands that are being displayed here, so let me roll down a little bit into this list. Try again. Okay, there we are, flap ratio. So now let me narrow my search down a little bit. I'll type in controls flap underbar ratio, and that will isolate it. So with the flaps fully up, we see that the ratio is 0.0. which tells me that this particular DataRef is a floating point DataRef rather than an integer DataRef like the taxi light that we had worked with before. Okay, dropping 10% flaps gives us 0.33. 20% flaps gives us 0.66. And flaps fully down, that is 30%, gives us 1.0. So if we wanted a condition of 20% or 30% flaps, we could use the expression greater than 0.4, since 10% flaps is 0.33. Okay then, let's code this up. So I'll bring my text editor up, and let me make a copy of this prop clear line, and we'll use that. So I'll put in landing flaps, vertical bar, and then we'll make this dark green, and then we'll say 20 to 30 degrees. That will be my caption, and then we'll put our DataRef in here, which is sim cockpit 2 controls flap underbar ratio, and then our condition, so we'll say colon, and we want it to be greater than 0.4. Okay, let me save that. I'll reload the checklist. Bring the checklist up. Let me get the editor back. Okay, we see it there. We're going to just click through these first few. Okay, now we're sitting waiting for the landing flaps, and I have my flaps all the way up here, as you can see. Let me drop one notch, so this will be 10%, and 10% is 0.33, which is not greater than 0.4, so it didn't trigger. Now we're going to drop it one more time to 20%. There we are, we triggered. That's because 20% is 0.66, which is greater than 0.4. So that's how it works. Now let's do an example where we require a controller to be within a certain range of values, such as the elevator trim position for takeoff. So the first step is to try to find a DataRef that associates with the elevator trim. Now, since the 208 has electrical trim, we have to turn our battery on first, so let me do that. Now I'll go to the DataRefEditor and type in trim. Now I'm going to move my trim wheel here and see what changes. Well, I see some autopilot things changing. That's not going to work. Let me roll down. Okay, here this looks right. ELV underbar trim. So let me just type that in, and that will isolate it. Now, if you look down here at the elevator trim wheel, you see these markers, and it says TO, that's takeoff, and that's a range. That line right up here, and it looks like I'm getting a value at pretty close to 0. So as I'm moving up, the numbers are getting smaller. Okay, and if I move above this line, it goes negative. So it looks like that top line ought to be 0. So that's going to be our bottom range value, 0. Now let's move down to this triangle, and we want to give ourselves a little bit of slop there. I'm going to say 0.25 on the upper range. So let's bring our editor up, and we'll code this up. So like before, I'll make a copy of this prop clear, and then I'll change the words prop clear to elevator trim, and then a vertical bar. We'll make this dark green, and I'll make my caption takeoff, then a colon, then I'll put in my DataRef, which was sim flight model controls ELV underbar trim, and then colon. Now we want our two ranges, so I'll put 0.0 vertical bar 0.25. Now I'll save it, reload the checklist, now we'll bring our checklist up. Okay, before I get started clicking through this checklist, I'm going to move my elevator trim all the way down to the bottom, so we'll make sure that it won't trigger initially. So I'll click through prop area, taxi light, and notice my flap gets checked because I still have them set at 20 degrees from the last example. So now we're sitting at the elevator trim. Now let me run my elevator trim on up here slowly. And there it goes. It triggered right at that point. Now here's a little situation. You cannot uncheck something, so I'm going to have to reload the checklist in order to test this again from the other end. So bear with me as I reload. Okay, just like before, except this time I'm going to go to the top end, run my trim all the way up to the top. And now we'll start clicking down through here. Prop, taxi light, our landing light set. Alright, now it's waiting for elevator trim, so let me very slowly move my elevator trim down. And there, right on the line. So let's take a look at our command again. You see I have elevator trim with takeoff. The tag says that, and then here's our DataRef, and our range, the vertical bar means the lower range and upper range. So it goes from 0 to 0.25 on the range. And that's how you do that. Now there's one final thing I'd like to show you with respect to SW item, and that is how you can combine these data refs using Boolean operators, the AND and OR. I'll just show you the AND. And let's just say for a simple example that I want to be able to tell if the taxi light is on and the beacon light is on at the same time. So I'm going to type in beacon here, and I get the data ref, as you can see, for the beacon light. Now I'll bring up my editor. And so just to save a little typing, I'm going to make a copy of the taxi light line here. And I'm going to delete everything except the data ref. And since they're so similar, I'll change taxi light to beacon light. And the way these compound expressions work, you have to put parentheses around your data ref. So let me do that. And if you're wanting to AND them together, then you use the double ampersand. So we'll put that on the end of this first line. So now let me change taxi light to taxi and beacon light. Because now we're wanting to check to see if both the taxi and the beacon light are on at the same time. Now a huge temptation is to leave these on separate lines for readability, but let's go ahead and reload the checklist and see what happens. So I've reloaded the checklist now, so let's bring it up. And it's not coming up. So when Xchecklist encounters an error in the checklist file, it just simply doesn't come up. So you're asking, what do I do about that? Well, Xchecklist logs errors in the same log file that Xplane uses for everything else. So in the base directory of Xplane 11 is the log.txt. So we need to view this file, and we'll just use our editor. Now this is a huge file, but since Xchecklist was the last thing we did, the error message should be at the very end of this file. So let's go there. And as you can see, Xchecklist has been doing quite a bit of griping and complaining here. We got 2 errors, and we've got a bunch of stuff about unmatched characters and a lot of things. And just a little bit of experience doing this helps you to kind of understand what's happening. You cannot have these compound statements on separate lines. And the most important part of these error messages is this line number. It's telling me line 25. No, that's where the problem is. So all we need to do to fix this is just remove the line feed between these 2 lines. So let's do that, and we'll try again. Okay, well that looks a little better. So we'll click our prop area, and now we're waiting for the taxi and the beacon light to be turned on. So let's turn on the taxi light, and we see that does not satisfy the condition. So now we'll turn on the beacon light. And that still does not satisfy the condition. So we've got a problem. Okay, well let's bring our editor back up and take a look at this. Here's our 2 DataRefs, taxi light on and beacon light on. Looking over in the DataRefEditor, it's beacon, it's beacon lights with an S. See, this is what you get sometimes by copying and pasting. You've got to make sure that you're getting it right. Okay, well let me add an S to beacon, and we'll try this again. Okay, the checklist is reloaded now, but I want to make sure that I turn the taxi light and the beacon light off before I bring the checklist up. Okay, let me turn on the taxi light. So far so good. And now the beacon light. Bang, we got it. So, a couple of good lessons here. You've got to make sure that you follow the rules for writing these expressions. The manual is pretty clear about that. And also, when you get errors, now you know where to look. Log.txt. Now that we've seen the various Xchecklist commands, let's look at the control keys or joystick buttons used to control Xchecklist. There are 5 actions that allow you to control Xchecklist. And to configure these actions, we go to Xplane Settings. And here, under the most unassuming name ever, Be Good, if you open that, you see Xchecklist. And if you open that, you see the 5 actions. And just like all the other keyboard entries, you can enter either a keyboard command or a joystick command for each of these actions. This first one, Check Item, checks the current checkbox and then moves to the next item. Next checklist follows the SW-continue go-to command to the next checklist, or it just falls to the next checklist if there is no continue command. Previous checklist is the opposite of next checklist in that it goes the opposite direction. Reload checklist is really handy in that it forces the clist.txt file to be reread, so you can make changes while you're flying and just hit that button and it will reload. And then finally, toggle checklist simply turns the checklist on and off, and where you were before is exactly where you will be when it gets redisplayed. Really a handy command. So let me just take a minute to show you the buttons I have assigned on my CH Fighter Stick and my CH Pro Throttle. I use the CH Control Manager utility, which was written by my buddy Bob Church, who is the same guy who wrote the device drivers for all of the CH products controllers. One smart dude. I do admit that Control Manager can be pretty intimidating, but I really believe there's nothing out there that rivals this tool in controlling your devices. Control Manager has a programming language of sorts. By using it, I have programmed each button on my controllers to produce up to 4 unique outputs. To accomplish this, I utilize what the CM refers to as a shift button, which I have assigned to the pinky button on my throttle. This works just like the shift key on your keyboard, except it is for joystick buttons. This effectively doubles all the buttons on your CH controllers. Now you might be wondering why on earth someone would want to have so many buttons. Well, it's more about having similar functions clustered together on a few keys rather than a variety. So by using the shift button, I get 2 functions from a single press of a button. I have written a CM program that allows me to hold the button for at least 2 seconds to produce yet another output. I can double that using the shift button, giving me a total of 4 outputs from a single button. Now, a great application of this method is the top 4-way hat switch on my throttle. I use the up and down switches for flaps and speed brakes. By clicking the down hat button, I drop flaps 1 notch. If I hold the button up for more than 2 seconds, it brings the flaps all the way up. If I hold the down button for more than 2 seconds, it drops the flaps all the way down to the bottom. Very logical and natural. Now if I hold the shift button in and do the same things, it does exactly the same things with flaps, except with speed brakes. It's functionality like this that has kept me hanging on to my CH gear for some 20 years. So to control Xchecklist, I have all 5 commands mapped to just 2 buttons on my fighter stick. Since clicking the next checkbox needs to be of the utmost convenience, I map that function to the pinky button at the bottom of my stick, since I normally always have my hand there. Now if I hold the shift button and click the pinky button, that toggles my checklist on and off. I use the button on the left side of the fighter stick for the other 3 functions. A simple click of this button takes me to the next checklist. Holding the shift button and clicking this button takes me to the previous checklist. That leaves only the reload action. Since I don't want to accidentally do this, I have to hold the shift button, then hold this side trigger button in for 2 seconds in order to reload my checklist file. It amazed me how natural this felt and how quickly I got used to it. And it didn't take me long at all to realize that to manage the checklist involved my index finger and my little finger. Okay, well here we are 39 minutes into this video, and I'm finally getting back to what I originally wanted to show you. I hope that you're taking advantage of the index that I've built. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you see the little markers. Those are the various chapters, and you can just simply go to whatever you're interested in. If you hover over it, you'll see the chapter title, and you can easily move around the video. So as I had mentioned before, the most important part of the checklist is this page that I call the splash page. So I have filled this out. Let me get it up on the screen. The purpose of this page is to summarize everything I might want to know about the aircraft during flight in the event that I'm not using the checklist. And the idea is that I could pop this screen up while I'm flying and know various V speeds or the flight profiles for takeoff, climb, low cruise, high cruise, descend, land, so forth. Kind of a mini checklist all on one screen. I have filled out all the checklist stubs now, and I just want to make some general comments about my design philosophy. Let's start with the pre-flight checklist here. And one of my goals is to force you to locate all the switches and other important controls to help you better learn the aircraft. But I only want to do that here in the pre-flight checklist and not bother you with those kinds of details later on. And if you find this a hindrance, you can simply skip the pre-flight checklist. So let me point out a couple of interesting things about this pre-flight checklist. You might find this noise canceling headset item kind of odd. I think this is a Carenado bug. Sometimes when I start up, the aircraft external sound is like full volume, very distracting. And what I find I have to do is go into the sound settings and just move that slider a little bit, and it fixes it. So this checklist item's just a reminder to me to go in and do that. Now I must show you the logic behind this main panel switches off. I spent about 4 hours getting this right. Let me show you this in the editor. After quite a bit of investigation, I found the DataRefs for all the switches on the panel. There's a few of them that appear to just not do anything, but all the ones that I could find, I've ANDed them all together and test for the off condition. It's totally unreadable because all these have to be on the same line and there can't be any spaces. It's a mess, but it works. And the point of all this is to make sure that your aircraft is in a cold and dark condition during this pre-flight. And as you can see from the lack of pluses, only about half of these are automatic because I'm trying to force you to find where these controls are. And notice the cyan colored line at the bottom. I decided to use SW item for this to have a checkbox there because I didn't want the checklist to just automatically move on to the next checklist until you've had a chance to see everything and make sure everything is checked. And it's simple enough to just hit the next checklist button anyway to move on if you want to. So as you can see, I've got these next lines on each one of my checklists. Make sure they stop at the bottom every time. This is about all I want to say about these checklists. There's a link to this checklist in the description and you can download it from explain.org. And of course, if you do so, I encourage you to only use it to study. Don't just use it, because you'll learn a lot more if you do your own. And I encourage you to interact with me, put in some comments, ask questions, criticize me, whatever. I especially appreciate subscribing if you haven't. Like the video. All of those things are encouraging, and I appreciate that. And as always, thanks for watching.